60 minutes. 1 assassination, or your soul is erased forever. This is the impossible contract Hikaru signed, to trade his afterlife for a second chance at life. On a stormy night, rain cascaded relentlessly over a quiet multi-story building, while inside a dim wooden hallway, the original Roland Nui Zarasha, tall, blonde, radiating the unnerving calm of someone who had absolutely rehearsed this moment, cornered a dark-haired teen named Hikaru and delivered the most unhinged job offer since employment was invented. You must kill a man. Hikaru stared down at his own hand in rising panic as Roland casually added a 1-hour deadline and confirmed that failure meant total soul obliteration, all with absolutely no change in facial expression. Hikaru's face went nuclear. Eyes wide, mouth open, maximum sweat. Cut to outside, a convenience store called Mamily Mart glowing in the wet night, a box truck screaming off into the rain and leaving something grim behind, while a philosophical narrator questioned why all the dead have to walk to the afterlife in a group, like some kind of cosmic mandatory field trip. The shot dissolved into a foggy, ethereal landscape of tall gray stone pillars rising through thick white mist. A disclaimer materializing in the silence. Just to note, this was fiction, and right in the middle of this otherworldly waiting room, shuffling through a massive, orderly queue of barefoot, white-robed souls, was Hikaru. He stared at the rows of bare feet on the clean floor below him. The guy ahead tilted his head back with a long, weary sigh, and Hikaru internally agreed with every atom of that energy, staring into pure void. He reached up and scratched the back of his head with almost impressive composure and accepted it. He was dead. Made sense. He'd always preferred keeping his distance from people anyway, his family very much included. Still, in the cosmic waiting room of the afterlife, things did not stay peaceful for long. A massive, bald, muscular man in robes started bellowing at someone in the queue, and Hikaru, peeking from behind a stone wall, watching this absolute unit act like a schoolyard bully in the literal afterlife, reasoned that since he was already dead, the usual social calculus of don't get involved was kind of moot. He sprinted out from cover, launched into the air, and caved the bald man's midsection in with a flying kick, something he'd freely admit he never would have done while alive, sending the bully skidding hard across the dust. He followed up with a crushing stomp to the chest, and the bully's 2 companions grabbed him by the legs and dragged him away. Hikaru turned to the person who'd been getting bullied, helped him to his feet, got his name, and introduced himself as Hikaru. The guy noted he looked very young. He was 15, which briefly caused the 18-year-old to spiral about having just been saved by a kid 3 years younger. He handed Hikaru a stuffed cloth sack as thanks. Hikaru accepted it with mild curiosity, and the young man waved, said he'd see him around, and vanished into the misty void. Then, before Hikaru could process any of that, a vision of a blond boy in a dark formal uniform with a high collar flashed before his eyes, murmuring something soft about kindness, before materializing directly in front of him in the queue, hunched over, sweating, barely functional, gasping that he needed Hikaru to listen. Hikaru clocked the bizarre attire and had absolutely no idea what was happening, but the boy waved off any small talk. No time. He stepped out of the line, gestured for Hikaru to follow, and proposed, with the energy of the world's most unhinged housing offer, that Hikaru come to his world and live in his house. Hikaru's face went completely blank. The boy clarified he was about to die, which, as Hikaru pointed out very reasonably, they were both already. The boy explained he was from another world entirely and had used a cross-world ability to get here, the limit of that ability being this exact moment, which did not in any way clarify anything for Hikaru. Then he reached out his hand and begged Hikaru to come, to make his wish come true, and with arms wide and complete conviction, announced that in return, Hikaru could come back to life and be reincarnated. Hikaru went completely shell-shocked, standing in ringing silence before the reality of the offer cracked through. He murmured out loud about the absurdity of there actually being life after death. The boy reassured him, "Live freely. Just fulfill the request." Hikaru, being an extremely pragmatic dead person, asked what the catch was. What exactly would he need to do in exchange for his life? The boy smiled mysteriously and said he'd explain once Hikaru was back alive. Hikaru's jaw dropped. The boy promised nothing bad would happen to him, and Hikaru, sweating, weighed his soul's entire continued existence against the word of someone he'd met 90 seconds ago. He sighed, then agreed. The boy bowed in profound relief, admitted he was genuinely curious about other worlds himself, announced he'd performed the world-crossing technique, and introduced himself, Roland Nui Zarasha, as the space warped around them, and he declared from the center of a massive glowing magic circle, "And I will give you my body." The blinding light faded, and Hikaru woke up warm, genuinely unsettling after the cold void of being dead. He groaned, pushed himself off the wooden floor of a room he'd never seen, dragged himself to a dresser mirror, hand trembling as he reached up to touch his own reflection, and whispered that this couldn't be real. Then an agonizing, high-pitched ringing detonated inside his skull. A torrent of foreign memories flooded in. A full life story uploaded directly into his brain, and the obvious conclusion snapped into place. Roland's memories. When the headache cleared, the truth was just sitting there. He was Roland now. A soft voice called from behind him. He spun around and found the translucent, glowing spirit of the original boy hovering there, and immediately accused him of lying. Roland raised his hands defensively. Hikaru threw his arms wide, and Roland dropped all pretense. "You're right, and I'm asking you to kill Count Morgusburd, a gray-haired, mustachioed nobleman who had Roland's parents killed after Roland tried to expose his corruption, and who Roland had already partly defeated using something called a soul-sucking stone at the catastrophic cost of most of his own soul." Hikaru squared up. Roland delivered the hard terms. Failed to kill the Count within the hour, and Hikaru's soul gets rejected. Nowhere to go, instant obliteration. Roland doubled down with raw desperation, insisting keeping the Count alive would be catastrophic. Hikaru, accepting he had zero leverage, spotted a dagger on the floor, picked it up, stood upright, adjusted his school uniform, and committed. Roland's spirit offered a gift, a hand pressing firmly onto Hikaru's shoulder from behind, the spirit instructing him to sharpen his senses. Before Hikaru could even finish asking what that meant, a glowing, translucent holographic screen materialized in midair. Roland rasped that these were Hikaru's powers, and he'd explain while he still could, then vanished entirely, leaving Hikaru alone. He checked the internal timer. 55 minutes. He told himself to calm down and reached for the interface. A system prompt appeared. Unlock the soul board for 1 energy point. Hikaru puzzled over it briefly, then confirmed. Unlock. The screen erupted into a massive glowing web of interconnected skill paths, and Hikaru's gamer brain registered it in half a second. Skill tree. Point pool. 14. Down from 15 because he was 15 years old. Classic age-based distribution. He built his strategy immediately. Main objective was the Count undetected, which meant stealth and agility dominated the build. He swiped across the interface. It handled exactly like a tablet, sliding through locked category screens, triangle lock, diamond lock, pentagon lock, hexagon lock. 7 pages total. 6 points to check every screen with 45 minutes left on the clock, timer actively counting down. Not worth it. Prioritize. He skipped magic. Didn't know if this body could even channel it. Skipped strength, because this wasn't a brawl scenario, and zeroed in on the agility branch until he froze on exactly the node he needed. He confirmed the unlock. Some nodes were marked, some weren't. He connected the dots and confirmed. The system announced 3 skills unlocked. 10 points left. He ran the math. Don't spread evenly. Watchdog risk. Max perception. 5 out of 5. Then a new node materialized. The system displayed its name. Assassination. Description: controls the fate of an attack to make it lethal. Performed without the opponent noticing. Maximum 3 points. 3 points? 3 silent kills. He smiled coldly. If he was going to live in this world, this was exactly what he needed. He locked it in at 3 out of 3. A sniper node appeared after that, something he absolutely would have wanted, but he was flat broke on points. He squared his shoulders, declared it was time to run the build, activated stealth, and watched his own body turn translucent. He was disappearing. Inside Roland's residence, the countdown hit 35 minutes. Hikaru, school uniform, signature ahoge, and the absolute audacity of someone with zero business doing any of this, stepped into a quiet wooden-floored hallway and pulled from Roland's downloaded memory banks that the Count was somewhere in the city. Earlier, he'd stopped at a reception desk to retrieve what looked like a room key, the key left on the counter as the receptionist watched his retreating back with narrowing, suspicious eyes. He'd sprinted through the pouring rain as lightning cracked across the sky over the Count's imposing stone estate, then crouched drenched outside a wooden side door, gasping in the downpour. Back door, locked. Front entrance it was. Inside the corridors, 2 men walked past him mid-conversation and did not notice him at all. He genuinely couldn't believe it. He took the stairs and froze at the bottom when 2 armed guards appeared ahead with swinging lanterns. He crammed himself behind a low wooden cabinet and didn't breathe. One stopped, noticed something. Wet floor. He concluded it was the rain, and they speculated briefly about recent visitors before moving on. Hikaru listened from behind the wall, exhaled in slow relief, and acknowledged that stealth was pulling serious weight. 15 minutes. Only one room in the entire corridor had its light on. He pushed the door open and slipped inside, then froze as a raspy voice grumbled from the darkness, and he recognized it from Roland's memories. He'd found him. What followed was Hikaru standing before the final door and having a deeply thorough psychological crisis in real time. He was about to open it and kill a man. He pressed his fingers to the soul board one last time to confirm his build, rested his palm against the heavy wooden door, and ran through every stage of terrified self-talk a person can manage, assuring himself it was going to be all right, that the kill was necessary, that he'd survive this, breathing through the shakes, forcing his posture straight, squeezing cloth in his hands until his knuckles went white. Then a memory surfaced from his past life. Blinding headlights, a massive truck, a silhouette gone in an instant. People die easily. 10 minutes. He set his jaw, narrowed his eyes, and crossed the threshold. Inside the Count's grand office, Count Morgs, gray-haired, slick, mustachioed, radiating the smug aura of a man who believed himself completely untouchable, sat behind his large desk in the rain-spattered quiet, skimming documents with a satisfied smirk. A sharp creak broke the silence, and he looked up. He demanded to know who was there, scanning the still double doors, then decided it was his imagination. He leaned back and mentally congratulated himself on having dismantled the Zarasha family, completely oblivious to the silent figure standing directly behind his chair. A cold, lethal voice cut through the room, declaring he was wrong about all of it. The Count spun around in pure shock, while Hikaru, frozen in the background, registered his own jolt of surprise. The intruder announced, "I'm Roland Nui Zarasha." Roland's spirit, hovering nearby, murmured an apology and claimed the Count as his. The Count screamed Roland's name back at him and scrambled backward in sheer terror, while Hikaru raised the dagger. Roland's spirit quietly warned Hikaru that he didn't want this memory to taint him, and Hikaru's answer was to launch himself across the room at full sprint. The Count scrambled for his desk drawer, reaching frantically for a signal bell, muttering that he couldn't stand it, while Roland's spirit reminded Hikaru not to underestimate him. Hikaru's eyes blazed as he slammed off the floor and screamed that he was ready. The Count froze in pale, sweating terror. Hikaru slammed into him and drove the dagger into his side. He wrenched the blade back out. The Count hit the floor and didn't get up. In the silence after, Roland's spirit stared at his own translucent hands and admitted he couldn't believe Hikaru had actually done it. Hikaru pointed out that Roland had clearly planned to do it himself from the start. Roland admitted it. He'd thought it would be better for Hikaru that way. Hikaru paused, and with a faint nervous smile, noted they were both accomplices now. Roland closed his eyes with a small smile, the profound relief finally breaking over him. He murmured his thanks as a brilliant aura of light began wrapping around Hikaru, quietly relinquishing his hold on the body, and looked into Hikaru's eyes one last time, asking his name. "Thank you, Hikaru. My name, my memories will always be with you." He whispered that he'd always be praying for Hikaru's future as his features dissolved into wisps of wind. In a final vision, his spirit stood tall in a stellar glow, with arms raised, promising a bright future, before going completely dark. Back in the Count's silent office, Hikaru was deeply, catastrophically not okay. He hunched over, shaking, gripping his own wrist hard, unable to process what had just happened, whispering to himself that he'd actually done it. Then a calm, entirely unbothered voice came from the doorway. "Did you kill him?" He snapped around and found a silver-haired girl in a frilled formal dress standing in the frame, meeting his stunned gaze with complete composure. Her hair was styled with one long strand curving upward, and black butterfly ribbons pinned to the sides. Two things registered simultaneously. She was genuinely stunning, and a distant alarm bell was ringing through the estate. She noted simply that the knights were on their way. The sound of boots thundering down the corridor made it immediately, viscerally real. Hikaru started frantically calculating whether stealth could carry him out of there before Louviere raised her hand and pointed to the balcony, directing him to a rope ladder. Suspicion flared. How could she help him without knowing anything about him? But she cut it off and told him to just go. He went. Crouching on the rain-slicked balcony ledge, he listened to the guards below puzzle over Louviere's presence as the whole estate ignited. Someone had found the body. Guards swarmed the railings, spotted the dangling rope ladder. A large guard bellowed for everyone to move to the second floor. Louviere stood silently in the doorway as chaos erupted around her and the hunt mobilized. Hikaru ran through the dark and rain until there was nothing left chasing him, eventually hitting the ground against a tree trunk in a quiet, dark graveyard, his legs giving out beneath him, sinking to the base with a long, weary sigh. He stared up at the stormy sky and thought about the silver-haired girl, why she'd helped a complete stranger with no explanation, no reason. He gripped his own arm in the dark, sitting alone in a world that still felt completely unreal. The only thing making him feel alive. Coming soon in the April issue of Sachi Satenai Rulebreaker. Days after his rock-bottom moment in the storm, this guy had the audacity to clear up completely. And Roland was out here trudging a quiet dirt path through sparse woods, running his very first low-key adventurer arc. The plan was airtight. Become an adventurer for the income and score a guild lead ID in the process, the only legal form of identification this world seemed to offer. Current commission? Collect poisonous microtoxins. Beginner-friendly, always available, 200 Gilang baseline reward. He spotted the white bell-shaped flowers past a small clearing. And crept forward with the full caution of someone who had read the quest fine print. Then a wild boar detonated out of a bush, and he completely short-circuited. It scampered into the brush, leaving Roland trying to collect himself. The boar had, unfortunately, much bigger problems. A colossal big green wolf materialized from the shadows and immediately solved them. Roland went full statue mode, instantly placing the breed. Big green wolf. The type, the guild data flagged as vicious pack hunters, with a detection radius so wide that his current position was a certified death zone. He shifted his weight to back away and snapped a twig underfoot. The wolves kept eating, completely unbothered. Not a single head turned. Here is the mechanic. Roland was running the Blessing of Protection, a perk pulled from his soul board and activated through the Guild Power app. Think of it like equipping a passive in an RPG. The in-app diagrams literally illustrated the difference between an unblessed fighter hacking uselessly at a log and the same fighter slicing clean through it in one boosted swing. The ranking logic was elegant. Fewer letters in the blessing name meant a more broken effect, and his current active pick was the Blessing of Protection. Stacked with his native stealth skill, the combo created a concealment so absurdly overtuned that he crouched beside a functioning apex predator pack and quietly looted every single herb from the area without a single wolf noticing. He walked out of the forest like he owned it. Back in Solus, the Adventurers Guild was already running its signature NPC side quest. Headband Guy and Red Beanie were in full competitive mode, both running coordinated campaigns to land a date with receptionist Fluere in the most embarrassing way possible. Headband Guy elbowed the competition out of the way and practically climbed over the wooden counter to push his case harder. Fluere was visibly panicking when Roland stepped up and ended the whole sorry scene with a single, "Excuse me." She lit up instantly, waving him over like he just respawned to save her. And Roland mentally filed her as the receptionist who'd helped him get his guild card. She lit up instantly, waving him over like he'd just respawned to save her. And Roland mentally filed her as the receptionist who'd helped him get his guild card. Headband Guy was not thrilled about being eclipsed by a teenager. And Roland ignored him entirely, focused on requesting another commission. The tension at the desk spiked immediately. That is when the scarred companion stepped up, and Roland's interface tagged him on sight. Chernenko Regalo. He scanned the floating stats. Strength, 3 out of 30. Underwhelming. Nobody else could see the display, because Roland had apparently developed the ability to read other people's soul boards entirely on his own, invisible to everyone around him. Because Roland had apparently developed the ability to read other people's soul boards entirely on his own, invisible to everyone around him. So he just looked at the man and said, "If you are a true adventurer, why do you come here to waste your time?" The scarred one's hand dropped to his sword hilt. His companion hauled him back before blood got spilled, the pair turning to leave, but the unnamed adventurer got one final word in over his shoulder. "I'll remember this." Roland watched their backs, already clocking this as a future problem. Fluere immediately started spiraling about whether Roland was going to be okay, convinced that provoking those two was a bad idea. Roland dismissed the concern, noting Chernenko didn't seem that strong. She corrected him. Chernenko had a genuine reputation for physical ability in the guild, and she pointed out that other adventurers used protective blessings too. Chernenko's selection was particularly noted. Was he running 5-letter blessings? Yes, with a very strong loadout. She then dropped the guild's unofficial power tier. 4 blessings made you an advanced adventurer. 3 was ultra rare. 2 was legendary. 1 was mythic. Was he running 5-letter blessings? Yes, with a very strong loadout. She then dropped the guild's unofficial power tier. 4 blessings made you an advanced adventurer. 3 was ultra rare. 2 was legendary. 1 was mythic. Roland stood there, silently running his own internal blessing inventory. Night Stalker, Blessing of the Secret, Eye of the Typhoon, Power of Huo Lest Hu. civilian, plus whatever he'd accrued from the Count's assassination job. While Fluere stared at him and asked what was wrong, she leaned over the counter with a teasing grin and asked if he was getting scared already. He blushed, looked away, and said absolutely nothing. Smart. He pivoted immediately by announcing he'd already completed the order, and Fluere confirmed the poisonous plant commission on her clipboard. Roland then slammed the enormous sack onto the counter. Her eyes went wide. She explained carefully that those plants grew specifically in griffin wolf territory. She needed to ask directly, were there any green wolves? Yes, there were. Louviere short-circuited, and she needed to ask directly, were there any green wolves? Yes, there were. Roland Nui Zarasha. Fluere short-circuited. She recovered by deciding, heroically, that he must have just gotten very lucky. Roland agreed it was better to leave it at that. She moved on to the evaluation, processed the massive haul, and returned with a heavy coin purse. He thanked her sincerely. She blushed with a ferocity that could power a small city. Then she leaned over and asked if he was heading home for the night. He said he still had time for another quest. Fluere lit up with unbridled enthusiasm and immediately offered to personally handpick the best missions for him. He thanked her sincerely. She blushed with a ferocity that could power a small city. Then she leaned over and asked if he was heading home for the night. He said he still had time for another quest. Fluere lit up with unbridled enthusiasm and immediately offered to personally handpick the best missions for him. Roland asked if she was sure about that. She declared she absolutely was and spun off toward the archives. Every male adventurer in the lobby watched her go with obvious hearts in their eyes. Left waiting at the counter, his thoughts turned darker. Days had passed since the Count's murder, and he'd heard nothing. And he found himself wondering what had happened to the blonde girl in the white dress from that night. When Fluere came back, she froze the moment she caught him staring into the middle distance. He mumbled awkwardly. Left waiting at the counter, his thoughts turned darker. Days had passed since the Count's murder, and he'd heard nothing, and he found himself wondering what had happened to the blonde girl in the white dress from that night. When Fluere came back, she froze the moment she caught him staring into the middle distance. He mumbled awkwardly. She flustered and demanded to know what he was doing. Then he dropped his voice and asked whether she'd heard anything in town about someone important being killed. Her jaw hit the floor. She leaned over and hissed that this was her best-kept secret and barely anyone knew. Roland scratched his head and gave a conveniently vague answer about fuzzy memory, then carefully probed whether an adventurer might be involved. She shook her head. Government officials had come directly to consult her about any suspicious new guild arrivals and investigate a possible adventurer connection to the killing. Roland called it quite a difficult assignment, and she reminded him firmly, secret. Understood? He nodded sincerely. One perfectly controlled bead of sweat tracking down his cheek. Fluere then snapped back to professional mode and spread a curated mission shortlist across the counter with a loud paper-rustling flourish, bragging that these were personally handpicked by a professional receptionist. Roland smiled and thanked her. She looked genuinely surprised by the sincerity. Told him he seemed different from before, and he tilted his head in confusion. Adventurers almost never thanked her for things like this, she admitted, and he said simply that he was just grateful for the hospitality, since he'd never been treated so well before. That was apparently enough to set off a minor emotional crisis at the desk. He politely asked if she'd said something. She emphatically waved that off and pivoted back to asking what mission he'd like. He scanned the list aloud. Cleaning, church shopping, roof repair, restocking coal, talking to senior citizens. He slid the papers back. Excuse me, but I will refuse all of them. The scream Fluere produced could be heard from the street. So, instead, Roland went hunting. He'd settled on the Red Horn Rabbit Commission, and back in the guild, the receptionist had warned him these things had elite-tier detection and escape speed. Roland was already knee-deep in the grass before she'd finished the sentence. He crouched behind dry brush, completely invisible to his prey thanks to the stealth build, and pulled up the quest details. 0 base reward, but a clean 10,000 gilang per kill. Objectively, the perfect commission for an invisibility build. He drew his dagger, and yeah, there was a completely predictable moment of hesitation over ending something small and fluffy. He pressed his palms together, offered a brief silent prayer, then opened his eyes with sharpened focus and moved. Done. A level-up aura erupted around him instantly. He understood the mechanic. Defeating creatures with your own power raised your soul rank. But the rush of new stats dragged up a memory. Count Morgusburd on the floor, and the logical, sobering follow-up hit immediately. If he had this kind of power, other people in this world definitely did too. He pulled up his status screen. Hikaru, age 15, rank 0, 4 points. Closed it and started the walk back, quietly agonizing over what to actually spend those accumulated points on. The town materialized ahead, and he let himself feel briefly good about how efficiently the stealth build was carrying his quest output. The plan was simple. Stack enough money to live well and wait for the heat from the murder to die down. Then, rounding a corner, he caught 2 patrol riders in sharp, dark uniforms, having a very quiet, very dangerous conversation. He slowed immediately, instincts firing. One told the other he thought they'd figured it out. The name of a secret organization hung in the air, the Orchid of the Moon. And then came the line that stopped Roland cold. They had found the murderer of Count Morgus. He froze completely. The peaceful grind arc was over. Out on the packed city streets, 2 military guards were carrying on a conversation with approximately 0 operational security. One casually announcing that the murderer of Count Morgusburd had been captured. Every word landing cleanly in Roland Nui Zarasha's ears as he moved past them in his adventurer's cloak. The news hit him like a physical blow, because Roland was the one who killed the Count. So his very calm, very rational next thought was, then who the hell did they catch? He shelved the existential crisis for a moment, because before he could spiral, Fluere, the guild receptionist, was already calling his name, forcing him to fake composure until she had to yell it a second time. Cut to the Adventurers Guild lobby. Roland posted up at the public notice board in full brooding protagonist mode, while Fluere stood a few feet away, suffering through an entirely one-sided personal crisis about his jawline. She snapped out of it and demanded his attention, which got approximately nothing coherent out of him, echoing her frustration halfway into the street. Eventually, she slapped a bundled redhorn rabbit on the counter. Hunt submission. Needed time to evaluate. Roland asked why. She started to explain, and then an ancient man with a beard down to his knees materialized beside her, like a loading screen event NPC. Fluere recognized him immediately as Uunken, their senior appraiser, who peeled back the cloth and assessed the specimen with total authority. Basically, there's nothing to match its market value. Roland looked at him. Fluere made a noise. Uunken smiled pleasantly. Something about this man was obviously not what it appeared to be. And the moment he reached for the bundle, Roland's soul board, the floating RPG stat screen that constitutes his entire strategic advantage in this world, auto-triggered on the old man's profile, and Roland's brain immediately caught fire. Uunken glanced back and asked if there was something he wanted to say. Roland said, no, absolutely nothing. This was a lie delivered through gritted teeth, because the screen was displaying a skill tree nearly identical to his own, but fully maxed out, including a branch ominously labeled Massive Disruption. Its circular icon pulsed like a server alarm no one had patched. He tapped the interface. The menu expanded and confirmed everything. The dexterity board cleared. He scrolled further. Branches he hadn't even mapped yet. The mental strength board also cleared. He reached the bottom and the full picture resolved. This old man had completed all 7 soul boards: magic, life force, physical strength, agility, dexterity, intuition, mental strength. Every path lit and maxed, while Roland was still grinding his second row. The only logical conclusion: this was not just an appraiser. This was almost certainly the guildmaster. Then Uunken cut him a sideways look so sharp it could have drawn blood, and Roland immediately started waving his hands. He pivoted to a cover excuse about waiting times. Uunken absorbed it calmly and said the evaluation would be done by tonight. Roland exhaled slowly. Fluere bowed to her impossibly overpowered coworker as he walked off. When the clock hit noon and Fluere announced she was off for the day, Roland's next move was already forming. She offered to help. He turned to her with the expression of a man about to issue classified intelligence and told her he had a personal question. He reached slowly inside his cloak. He asked if she had time. Fluere's imagination immediately constructed the wrongest possible interpretation of all of this, and she completely lost it. Having successfully detonated the receptionist's composure, Roland stepped outside to let the debris settle. The morning sun stretched long shadows down from the guild building as he hit the street with a map in hand, moving through the flow of ordinary townspeople with his head down. Then he stopped, not dramatically, just a flat, sudden halt, because nothing visible was wrong, but his detection and intuition nodes were already flagging 4 distinct presences tailing him through the shadows. Down a nearby alley, the ringleader of this particular squad of side antagonists, a scarred young man named Chernenko, running what was clearly a C-tier ambush operation, was coordinating with his pale, grinning associate to spring the trap. Roland, because he had already anticipated all of this, quietly slipped into his own alley, pulled up his soul board, and ran numbers on his detection, magic detection, life detection, and intuition clusters. His upgraded perks extended hostile intent detection to 10 meters, no line of sight required, which meant he had their exact positions while they had absolutely nothing on him. He rounded a sharp corner, cloak fluttering, and simply wasn't there when the thugs came barreling after him. Just a solid brick wall where he should have been. Their leader refused to accept the geometry.
"He's not here!"
The scarred one scanned every crate, every chair of the nearby terrace. Utterly baffled, Roland was standing directly in front of them, fully invisible, watching. "I'm right in front of you." Another thug pointed blindly past his shoulder. Roland turned and walked out. "Sorry, but I'm a little busy right now." The outdoor cafe terrace was sun-drenched, quaint, and aggressively peaceful, and Roland stood at its entrance in full adventurer's kit, confirmed from his note as the meeting point, watching a couple at a nearby table existing in blissful, completely uncomplicated normality, while quietly questioning whether his gear was appropriate for this. Then Fluere arrived in a light, sleeveless summer dress, apologizing for keeping him waiting, and Roland stared, like all of his rendering processes had simultaneously crashed. She tilted her head at his silence. He noted, recovering, that he'd only ever seen her in uniform. She confirmed. Yes, obviously. He told her it suited her. She turned the color of emergency lighting. They moved to a table, Roland leaning in immediately with the urgency of a man sitting on a time bomb, startling her mid-fork raise. He carefully framed his intent. She looked at her plate with the quiet devastation of someone who'd already worked it out. She supposed he hadn't invited her just for tea, had he? She told him it was fine. Apparently, to you, I'm just a girl who spits out useful information to newbies. Adventurers Guild receptionist. Roland panicked instantly and shoved a menu at her as emergency compensation. He'd cover anything she wanted. She played coy, pointed at one specific item, and Roland approved it without blinking. She lunged forward and gripped the table edge like she just won something significant. She was glowing. He flagged the waitress, specified it was his treat, and she arrived, bearing a fruit smoothie of genuinely structural concern. Massive glass, layered fruit, cream, flower garnish, and 2 straws. Roland stared at the dual straws like they were evidence at a crime scene. She reached for the glass with a grin. He made a noise. She shoved the whole thing directly into his face. He recoiled. "You must act like a man and drink it with me." Adventurers Guild receptionist. Then she pivoted from warlord to tearful in under a second. Roland scratched the back of his neck, completely cooked. He looked across the table, accepted his fate, and committed to the bit. She lit up immediately. They both leaned forward, faces inches apart, cheeks matching shades of crimson, eyes shut, sipping from the dual straws like two people fully inside a genre scene they had no way of escaping. Roland admitted, pulling back, that it was actually delicious. She agreed with maximum sincerity, and even their chibi forms were in total consensus. He let her have one more, then his expression flatlined. He looked across the table. She gave him the floor. She immediately raised a single finger and blocked herself with a firm X. No address sharing. Ever. Under any circumstances. He assured her that had never even crossed his mind. She processed that at speed and looked mildly offended by it. He pressed forward. "I understand they have captured the murderer of Count Morgusburd." The entire atmosphere of the table died in real time. She clasped her hands and demanded to know where he'd heard that. He said patrolman on the street. She rejected it with both hands. Classified information. And even if she knew who was arrested, she couldn't tell him. She apologized. He backed off and told her he'd pushed too hard. She watched him quietly. She asked why he needed to know. His knuckles went white on the tabletop. He gave her a cover story. A friend who'd been endangered and pursued by the Count, which she absorbed with a slow nod. Then she leaned in and made a decision. The arrested person was the first to find the body, already transferred to the royal court. Sentencing in 3 days. Roland went completely blank. She lifted her teacup, closing the subject. He stood and thanked her and walked. His mind started running the math immediately. The first person to find the body, that was impossible, because the first person who had entered that study, the one standing in that doorway, was Louviere. He pictured her behind a locked cell door, in chains. That doesn't make any sense. Roland Nui Zarasha. He stopped on the street. There was no version of this where he waited. Louviere had saved his life, and now she was sitting in irons, taking the fall for what he did, and Roland was already moving.
The video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Like the video if you're ready for the next part.